It was a Tuesday night in Speak, the kind of cold that clings to your breath and makes the streets feel heavier than they are. Outside Nell's gym, the lights were dim, the car park almost empty. A man finished his workout, stepped out, and walked toward his car. Then, two shotgun blasts shattered the quiet. The sound rolled through the neighborhood, echoing off rows of brick houses before fading back into silence. By the time anyone reached him, the man was gone. To most, it looked like a random shooting, just another burst of violence in a city that had grown used to headlines about drugs, guns, and revenge. But detectives who arrived at the scene knew better. This wasn't random. It was precise, clean, a message. The victim was one of the biggest cocaine traffickers Britain had ever produced. A man whose name rarely appeared in print, but whose reach stretched from Liverpool's docks to the heart of Europe's drug trade. His name was Colin Smigger Smith. His murder would expose cracks in a world built on money, loyalty, and silence. A world where even the quietest players could become targets overnight. And as the investigation unfolded, it revealed just how far that silence ran, from the streets of Merseyside to the jungles of Colombia. To understand the world Colin Smigger Smith lived in, you have to look at Liverpool itself, a city that became Britain's gateway for cocaine long before his name was ever whispered. The docks were its arteries. For decades, ships arrived from South America, Africa, and Europe, carrying everything from textiles to fruit, and hidden among them, kilos of cocaine. It started small, but by the 1980s, the smuggling wasn't just a hustle. It was an industry. The first generation of traffickers wrote the rulebook. Men like John Haas and Paul Bennett turned corruption into strategy. They bribed customs officials, staged fake police seizures to win early release from prison, and used those same connections to move more product once they were free. Their names became folklore in Merseyside, stories told in pubs and whispered in cells. Then came Curtis "Cocky" Warren, the man who took Liverpool's trade global. From the back streets of Toxteth to the canals of Amsterdam, Warren built one of Europe's largest cocaine networks. He dealt directly with South American suppliers, moving tons through Dutch ports, using coded pagers and offshore accounts. By the mid-1990s, he was worth hundreds of millions. To police, he was untouchable. To his city, he was proof that Liverpool could go toe-to-toe with any cartel in Europe. But every empire leaves a gap when it falls. When Warren was arrested and jailed in the late 1990s, the roots didn't close. They shifted hands. A new generation stepped in. Quieter, smarter, less reckless. They had learned from the chaos of the old guard. No flashy cars, no public feuds, just business. Among them were men like Colin Smigger Smith, the kind who preferred silence over status, who built networks that reached from the docks to Amsterdam without ever stepping into the spotlight. By the early 2000s, Liverpool wasn't just a port city anymore. It was the nerve center of Britain's cocaine trade. From there, the supply stretched outward. Manchester, Glasgow, London. Each street dealer unknowingly tied back to the same invisible web that started on the banks of the Mersey. It was a world run by logistics and loyalty, where money moved faster than names, and betrayal could erase a man overnight. And within that world, Colin Smith had quietly become one of its most trusted architects. Colin Smigger Smith didn't come from wealth or privilege. He grew up in Liverpool, a city that had seen boom and decline, grit and resilience in equal measure. The docks defined the rhythm of life, and for many, opportunity meant learning how to move things quietly. From those streets, Smith learned fast, not about violence or bravado, but about how the city worked, how money flowed, how to stay unseen while still holding power. He wasn't like the men who came before him. Curtis "Cocky" Warren built an empire by force of personality. Bold, fearless, always one step from a headline. Smith built his with silence. He didn't need to be feared to be respected. He made himself useful, reliable, invisible. Outside the trade, he kept life ordinary. He had a partner, a family, a routine that looked like anyone else's. School runs, local pubs, quiet weekends. It was that normality that made him invisible. The kind of man neighbors nodded to without realizing the scale of what he controlled. By the late 1990s, while police were still chasing Warren's ghost and the remnants of Haas and Bennett's schemes, Smith was building something new. A network that relied on trust, timing, and consistency. He was the man who could make a problem disappear, who could move shipments worth millions without leaving fingerprints, who could be everywhere and nowhere all at once. To law enforcement, he was a whisper, a name that appeared in reports but never quite in courtrooms. To his peers, he was an asset they couldn't afford to lose. And that's how Colin Smigger Smith climbed. not by shouting his power, but by mastering the art of staying quiet. By the mid-2000s, Colin Smigger Smith's network was running like clockwork. The routes from Amsterdam were stable, the suppliers in South America consistent, and the profits beyond imagination. But in the cocaine trade, all it takes is one mistake, one shipment gone wrong, to turn trust into suspicion. According to a 2008 report in The Observer, that mistake arrived in the form of a single consignment, half a ton of cocaine, around 500 kilograms. Gone. The story goes that Smith told his Colombian contacts the load had been seized by British police. On paper, that made sense. Seizures happened all the time. But whispers soon began to circulate through the underworld that this one was different. Some claimed the drugs were never taken by police at all, that they'd been quietly recovered, sold off through Dutch intermediaries, and the profits pocketed far from view. Nothing was ever proven, not in court, not in any official record. But in a world that runs on trust, even a rumor can be fatal. The Colombians started asking questions. European contacts grew cautious. And inside Liverpool's network, conversations turned tense. Who could be trusted? Who had lied? Who was next? For Smith, who had spent years keeping everything running smoothly, those whispers marked a shift he couldn't control. His silence, once his greatest strength, now made him an easy target for blame. Whether the story was true or not, it spread fast, from Amsterdam cafes to Merseyside backrooms. And every retelling made it sound more convincing. In the trade he'd helped build, perception mattered more than proof. And as those rumors hardened into belief, Colin Smigger Smith's untouchable reputation began to crack. Liverpool in the 2000s was a city split between two worlds. By day, it was regeneration projects, football, and working-class pride. By night, it was fear. Quiet streets where deals were made and debts collected. Cocaine money flowed through everything. The docks were still the arteries, but now the trade was faster, slicker, and more volatile. Younger gangs were emerging, ruthless, unpredictable, armed. They didn't follow the old rules. Where Colin Smith's generation valued order and reputation, this new wave saw violence as a shortcut to respect. Postcode feuds flared in places like Croxteth, Huyton, and Norris Green. Robberies turned into executions. It wasn't just about drugs anymore. It was about power, and that power was constantly shifting. The old guard traffickers tried to keep control, but the city was changing around them. Encrypted phones, European connections, and social media bravado were starting to define a new era. For every deal that went right, another ended in blood. In that chaos, Smith stood apart. He stayed quiet, careful, untouched by the noise. Getting to him was another matter entirely. There were no fingerprints, no surveillance tapes, no intercepted calls, just rumors and results. To some, he represented stability in an industry built on chaos. To others, he was a relic, a reminder of an older, slower way of doing things. But as violence tightened its grip on Liverpool, even men like Smith couldn't stay untouched forever. The city he helped shape was turning into a battlefield, and sooner or later, it would come knocking at his door. By the time darkness settled over Speak that Tuesday night, someone was already waiting. The air was damp, the kind that makes streetlights blur at the edges. Inside Nell's gym, the last few members were finishing their workouts. Colin Smigger Smith was among them. Routine, familiar, nothing unusual. When he stepped outside just after 8, the street was quiet. No arguments, no shouting, just the sound of a door closing behind him. Then came the echo. 2 blasts, sharp and close. A shotgun. Neighbors would later say it didn't even sound real at first. By the time anyone looked out, the car park was still again. The attack took seconds. Whoever pulled the trigger knew exactly what they were doing. No hesitation, no mess, no trace. Police later called it one of the cleanest hits they'd seen. No shell casings, no fingerprints, no witnesses willing to talk. Just a man on the ground and a silence that settled fast. Within hours, the news was everywhere. Not on the front pages, not yet, but in whispered calls, coded messages, uneasy glances across Liverpool. For years, Smith had kept the trade steady, predictable, disciplined. Now he was gone, and everyone in that world knew what that meant. Somebody had decided he'd outlived his use. It wasn't a feud. It wasn't chance. It was a decision. And in a city already soaked in violence, that single act shifted the balance again. Quietly, completely, and without warning. When news of Colin Smigger Smith's death spread through Liverpool, it wasn't met with shock. It was met with silence. Everyone seemed to understand what it meant, but no one was willing to say it aloud. There were two stories making the rounds, both dangerous, both believable. The first pointed far beyond Merseyside. According to this version, his death was retribution, a message from the Colombian suppliers. They believed Smith had crossed them over the missing consignment. Half a ton of cocaine gone without trace, and an explanation that didn't add up. In that world, trust wasn't something you could lose twice. And when Colombians lost patience, they didn't send letters. They sent warnings. The second theory kept things closer to home. Liverpool's underworld had changed. Younger, hungrier groups were moving in. Men who wanted the same routes, the same contacts, the same reach. Some say Smith's death was a takeover, not revenge. Remove one man, inherit his empire. No cartels, no international drama. Just business done the old way, face to face. Both theories traveled fast. Through safe houses, bar corners, even prison wings. Police heard them all, logged the whispers, chased the connections. But the truth stayed out of reach. No evidence, no names, just rumors that refused to die. 17 years later, the file is still open. Not for lack of suspects, but because none of them ever spoke. And maybe that's the most telling part. In a world built on silence, even murder doesn't break it. When Colin Smigger Smith was killed, the impact rippled far beyond the crime scene. To the public, it was another unsolved murder in Liverpool. But to the people who understood the trade, it was a fracture. For years, Smith had kept things steady. His death left a space that everyone wanted to fill. Almost overnight, new crews began to move in. The business didn't stop. It multiplied. The violence too. Shootings became routine. Loyalty became disposable. Without someone like Smith quietly holding the lines, Liverpool's underworld turned into open competition. Law enforcement saw the shift immediately. The National Crime Agency and Merseyside police began connecting dots across Europe. Gangs linking Liverpool to Spain, Holland, even Dubai. The old methods of control were gone. What replaced them was faster, colder, digital. To those who had worked under Smith, his death wasn't just the end of an era. It was the beginning of one they barely recognized. He had been a ghost while alive, but in death he became something larger. A myth. A cautionary story told in coded circles about how even the quietest men can end loud. Liverpool changed after that night. The money still moved, the drugs still came, but the balance was gone. In the years that followed, the lines between local and international blurred. Gangs in Liverpool, long operating under the shadow of figures like Curtis "Cocky" Warren or the older networks of Haas and Bennett, moved forward. Some vanished, others strengthened. Groups like the Houghton firm, also known as the Cantrell Farm Cartel, came to dominate where Smith's silence once reigned. This organization, rising through the 1990s and early 2000s, filled many of the voids left behind. In the public eye, Liverpool's gangs were no longer just local players. The city was part of a wider map. Arms and drugs flowing across Europe, deals struck in the Netherlands, supply chains stretching to Colombia and back. Smith's death remains officially unsolved. At Merseyside Police, the case is still open. But even that silence has weight. It says, some lines are too dangerous to cross. Some stories are meant to stay unfinished. And over time, Smith became more than a trafficker. He became a legend, a warning, a ghost. His story isn't about glory. It's about the fragility of power. How quickly trust can turn into betrayal, and how silence, once your shield, can become the weapon that ends you. To some, Smith was the last of an old breed, men who valued loyalty more than fame. To others, he was just another name in a violent business that never sleeps. Either way, his death marked a turning point, the end of one era and the start of something colder. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between, buried like the man himself under layers of silence. So what do you think? Was Colin Smigger Smith betrayed by the people he trusted most? Or did the rules of his own empire finally turn against him? Share your thoughts below. And if you want more untold stories from Britain's hidden empires, subscribe, stay curious, and keep watching. Because every secret world, no matter how carefully it's built, eventually leaves a trail.